Formula One just did the unthinkable. They gave the biggest advantage on the grid to the weakest engine in the sport. Honda isn't just behind, they're more than 10% down on the leader, a gap so massive it normally destroys an entire season. But instead of falling out of contention, Aston Martin just received extra testing time, a huge development boost, and a brand new rule created specifically for teams this far behind. More hours than anyone else. More freedom than anyone else. More chances to get it right than the teams who already did. And now, inside the paddock, there's one question nobody can ignore anymore. Did the FIA just save competition, or quietly create the next dominant team? To understand why this moment feels so explosive, you have to look at what ADUO was originally meant to be, because the version we're seeing now is almost unrecognizable. At its core, ADUO was supposed to be a safety valve. Nothing dramatic. Just a controlled way to keep the field close, to stop one engine from running away while others drift slightly behind. Think of it like a race where everyone is separated by small margins. If one car loses a bit of pace, you give them just enough help to stay in the fight, not enough to suddenly change the order. That balance was everything. Small deficits, small corrections. Predictable. Stable. And most importantly, fair. Because every team knew the limits. They knew exactly how much help was available, and under what conditions. Those limits shaped every design choice, every compromise, every risk taken years before the cars even hit the track. But here's where the entire system quietly collapsed. Because those limits had a ceiling. A point where the FIA essentially said, anything beyond this should never happen. There was no category for extreme failure. No plan for a gap this large. No mechanism to deal with a manufacturer falling completely off the pace. And that tells you something crucial. The rules were built on an assumption. That no team would miss the target by this much. But Honda didn't just miss it. They went beyond the system itself. Their deficit isn't just significant, it exists outside the structure ADUO was designed to control. And in that moment, the entire philosophy of the rulebook was tested. Because ADUO could no longer do what it was built to do. This wasn't a minor imbalance. This was a complete breakdown. And suddenly, the FIA faced a decision that would affect every team on the grid. Do nothing, and allow one manufacturer to fall so far behind that they become irrelevant. Or step in, and risk changing the competitive balance for everyone else. They chose to step in. But what they created in response wasn't just an extension of the system. It was something entirely new. And that's exactly why, inside the paddock, this didn't feel like a normal adjustment. It felt like the moment the rules stopped being fixed, and started reacting to performance itself. But here's where the situation stops being theoretical, and starts hitting every team directly. Because once this new category was confirmed, the numbers behind it changed everything. Honda didn't just receive a small adjustment. They were given a massive increase in development capacity. More testing hours than any other category allows, jumping to a level no one else on the grid can reach right now. And alongside that, a significant boost in budget, creating a development window that simply didn't exist before this decision. Now think about what that actually means in Formula One. Development is not just about working harder. It's about having more attempts. More chances to fail, learn, and try again. Imagine two teams solving the same problem. One gets a limited number of attempts. The other gets dozens more. Eventually, one of them is far more likely to find something that works. That's the real advantage. And that's why the reaction inside the paddock isn't just frustration, it's concern. Because every other manufacturer built their engine under strict, fixed limits. They optimized everything within those boundaries. They made trade-offs, sacrifices, and long-term decisions based on rules that were supposed to stay stable. Now those boundaries have shifted. Not slightly. Fundamentally. And that creates a completely different competitive environment. Because this isn't just about catching up. It's about how fast you can evolve once you're behind. And suddenly, the team with the biggest problem has the biggest opportunity to solve it. But here's where it becomes even more complex. Because this change didn't just increase the support, it accelerated it. The first evaluation of this system now happens earlier than originally planned, meaning Honda gains access to these extra resources sooner than expected. And in a sport where development cycles move incredibly fast, that timing is critical. A few extra weeks can mean the difference between a failed concept and a working one. Between staying stuck and suddenly moving forward. And that's exactly why this feels so uncomfortable for rival teams. Because they are not just competing against Honda as it is today. They're competing against what Honda can become, with more time, more tools, and more freedom than anyone else. But there's another layer that makes this even bigger. Honda isn't the only one in this position. Audi, another new manufacturer, also falls into this same category, meaning they receive the same level of support. So now, this isn't an isolated decision. It's a structural shift. A move to protect new engine suppliers, to keep them competitive, to make sure they survive this new era. And on the surface, that makes sense. Because Formula One needs competition. It needs multiple manufacturers fighting at a high level. But underneath that logic, there's a trade-off. Because while some teams are being given more opportunities, others are being asked to defend their position without any additional help. And that imbalance, even if temporary, is enough to change how the entire grid sees this decision. Because now, the question isn't just about fairness. It's about direction. About what kind of sport Formula One is becoming. Is it a pure competition, where every team lives with the consequences of their decisions? Or is it a system that adapts, adjusts, and intervenes when the gap becomes too large? And that question is exactly what's fueling the anger behind the scenes. Because once the rules start moving, nobody knows where they stop. And this is where the story finally collides with reality. Because everything we've talked about so far means nothing if it doesn't translate to performance on track. And right now, it doesn't. Because an engine deficit like this doesn't just cost you speed. It breaks the entire balance of the car. Imagine trying to sprint while carrying extra weight that no one else has. You don't just run slower, you lose rhythm, you make mistakes, and every movement becomes harder to control. That's exactly what Aston Martin is dealing with. The car isn't just lacking power. It's unstable, unpredictable, and incredibly difficult to drive at the limit. And when a driver can't trust the car, everything falls apart. You brake earlier. You hesitate on throttle. You lose confidence in every corner. And suddenly, you're not just slower on the straights, you're slower everywhere. That's the hidden damage of this deficit. But here's where things start to shift again. Because when a team reaches this point, something changes in their mindset. They stop protecting what they have. They stop making safe decisions. They start taking risks. Big ones. Concept changes. Aggressive ideas. Solutions that might completely fail, or completely transform the car. And now, with more testing hours than anyone else, more development freedom, and more opportunities to try again, those risks become far more powerful. Because failure is no longer the end. It's just part of the process. Try something. It doesn't work. You go again. And again. Until something clicks. And in Formula One, that moment can change everything. Because breakthroughs don't come from playing safe. They come from pushing beyond what others are willing to try. And this is where the story connects to something much bigger than just an engine. Because while everyone is focused on Honda's deficit, there's a parallel project quietly building in the background. A complete rebuild of Aston Martin's future. New structure. New direction. And most importantly, new design philosophy. Because this isn't just about fixing a weak engine. It's about redefining the entire car. And when you combine that with a development program that now has more time, more tools, and more freedom than anyone else, you create something unpredictable. Something that doesn't follow the same path as the rest of the grid. And that's exactly what makes rival teams uncomfortable. Because they're no longer just competing against a known quantity. They're facing a project that can evolve faster, and in ways they can't fully anticipate. But here's the twist that brings everything back down to earth. None of this happens instantly. There is no overnight fix. No sudden jump to the front. Because even with all the extra support, Honda still has to go through the full development cycle. Design, test, validate, get approval. And only then, introduce the changes on track. Which means for now, Aston Martin remains exactly where it is. Struggling. Fighting for small results. Trying to survive a deficit that cannot be hidden. And that creates the most important contrast in this entire story. Because while the paddock is reacting to what Honda has gained, the real impact hasn't arrived yet. It's building. Quietly. In the background. Race after race. And when it finally shows up, it won't just be an upgrade. It will be the result of months of extra freedom, extra time, and extra opportunity. And that's why the situation feels so tense. Because the teams at the front don't fear what Aston Martin is today. They fear what it might become. A team that had nothing to lose, given more chances than anyone else to get it right. And if they do, this moment won't be remembered as a controversy. It will be remembered as the turning point. The exact moment the balance of Formula One began to shift. And this is where everything finally leads, because the real impact of this decision is not about what happens next weekend, or even the next few races. It's about what happens when all of this hidden development finally comes together. Because by the time Honda introduces its upgraded engine, it won't just be a small step forward. It will be the result of months of extra testing. Hundreds of additional hours refining concepts. Millions invested into solving problems that other teams simply don't have the same time to explore. And that changes the scale completely. Because when those upgrades arrive, they won't be reacting to the early season anymore. They'll be built with a full understanding of what went wrong, what failed, what needed to be redesigned from the ground up. And that's a powerful position to be in. It's like taking an exam twice. The second time, you already know the mistakes. You already know where to focus. And in Formula One, that kind of learning curve can be the difference between fighting for points and fighting for wins. But here's where the tension across the grid becomes something much deeper. Because rival teams won't have the same opportunity to respond. They're already committed to their concepts, refining what works, making smaller gains, while Honda is rebuilding from scratch with more room to experiment. And that creates a very unusual scenario. The team that started the season furthest behind could end it improving faster than anyone else, and carry that momentum directly into the next year. Because this isn't just about upgrades. It's about trajectory, about direction, about how quickly a team can evolve when given the tools to do it. And this is where everything connects back to the bigger picture. Because the current season, realistically, is already out of reach for Aston Martin. The deficit is too large. The improvements arrive too late. That part of the story is already written. But the next chapter is completely open. Because all of this development, all of this extra support, all of this freedom to rethink the engine, it doesn't reset at the end of the season. It carries forward. Into the next car. Into the next concept. Into a project that suddenly has more data, more testing, and more understanding than it ever should have had this early. And that's why teams are not just frustrated. They're worried. Because they've seen this pattern before. A team struggles. They rebuild. They come back stronger. But rarely do they get this level of support while doing it. And that's the difference. This isn't just a comeback story. This is a compressed one. A faster rebuild. A more aggressive evolution. A team being pushed forward, not just by its own work, but by a system that now gives it more opportunities to catch up. So when teams say they're furious, it's not just about fairness today. It's about what happens when all of this pays off. Because if Honda gets this right, if the new engine closes that massive gap, if Aston Martin combines that with everything else they're building in the background, then this moment won't just be remembered as controversial. It will be remembered as the exact point where the future of Formula One started to shift. And that leaves one final question, the one nobody can answer yet. Did the FIA just protect competition? Or did they just help create the next team everyone else will be chasing?